All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. Just when it appeared that the Southeastern Conference was set to go with a 9 game conference schedule, they have decided to remain at 8 games while they are doing away with the divisional format when Oklahoma and Texas join the league next year. The Big Ten, Big 12, and Pac 12 all have 9 game conference schedules, leaving the SEC and ACC as the only Power Five conferences to have an 8 game slate. Now, everyone was not on the same page in the SEC in regards to the 9 game format, which would have meant 3 permanent games against rivals, while the other opponents would have been rotated. But now it looks like it's just going to be one permanent opponent with 7 rotating games. And in my opinion, the SEC just missed the mark in this one in more ways than one. Rivalries are what have made college football the monster that it is. And no conference embodies that more than the SEC. You think about some of the great and historic rivalries within the SEC: Auburn, Alabama; Georgia, Auburn; Alabama, Tennessee; Georgia, Florida; LSU, Alabama. These are just some of the many rivalries that have helped to shape the SEC. And when Texas joins the fray next year, it'll pave the way for the Longhorns to renew their rivalry with Texas A&M. And of course, that goes back to the days of the Southwestern Conference. Now, underlying issues such as money for an additional conference game were brought up, but you think about it. The Big Ten, which has had the 9 game conference schedule for several years, they seem to be doing fine. Same thing could be said for the Pac 12. Obviously, they're having other issues, and the same thing for the Big 12 as well. Now, each team from the SEC is probably going to make close to $50 million per year from their new television deal. So why not just play the extra conference game? At the end of the day, what it would mean is one less cupcake school for most of these schools to the in the SEC to play. And of course, a lot of those schools, or not a lot of them, but some of them bank on that because guess what? That gives them, an opportunity to become 6-6 and become bowl eligible and go play in a bowl game that most people don't care about in the first place. And you're talking about some of these teams, from the SEC that already play Power Five schools, every year. You look at Kentucky, Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida. They each have a game with a school from the ACC every year. Kentucky faces Louisville. Georgia takes on Georgia Tech. Clemson, South Carolina. Florida, Florida State. So obviously, they would have a school from a Power Five conference, and then of course, in that case, one less cupcake opponent for them. So it's probably just 2 cupcakes on the schedule. But even in the case of Florida this year, they're stepping out of conference just like they did last year when they hosted Utah. This season, they're going to begin the season in Salt Lake City at Rice Eccles when they take on Utah out of the Pac-12. But the SEC needs to realize this is the way that the college football landscape is shifting. And the SEC just needs to get with the times, especially since it's one of, if not the premier league in the sport. Now, SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey sounds like a man that wants to see a 9 game conference schedule for his league. And I guarantee you that you're soon going to be hearing backlash from fans around the conference if the third Saturday in October rolls around and we're not seeing Alabama face Tennessee, or there's no meeting between the hedges between Auburn and Georgia, or other historic rivalries that have helped to shape this conference go by the wayside. The SEC has several ways to fix this problem, but stubbornness, egos, fear, and pride are all getting in the way. In my opinion, and I talked about this before, you can keep the East West divisional format if you want. Just shift Auburn from the SEC West to the East when Texas and Oklahoma join the conference. And then on top of that, by doing so, you could set up a scenario where, hey, you could have Auburn and Alabama potentially meet in Atlanta for the SEC championship game. You can go the 3-6 format, which I think, would work. And obviously, if that was the case, it would preserve, some of those long-standing rivalries within the conference. But, some folks are worried about the competitive balance, even though honestly, there's only a handful of teams within the SEC, as good as it is, that have a legit chance to win the conference each year. And of course, that's only going to get tougher when Texas and Oklahoma join. And honestly, it won't matter that much because with the expanded playoff around the bend, and I've said this before, I'll say it right now, and I'm going to continue to say it. With this expanded playoff format coming, you're probably going to see the SEC get 3 or 4 bids per year. That's just fact. So, whereas things change within the SEC, some things simply remain the same as the power brokers there need a reality check. Will we see a 9 game conference schedule for the SEC at some point? I think we will because you have to, because there is no way that you can justify having a 16-team league and only having 8 games. And it's going to be a problem because you look at Georgia, for an example. Okay, you're doing away with the divisional format. So that means Georgia and Florida are no longer in the SEC East. So that means if you're going to have one common foe per year, is it going to be Georgia versus Florida or is it going to be Georgia versus Auburn? If you're Alabama, who's going to be your common foe? Is it going to be LSU? Is it going to be Auburn? Is it going to be Tennessee? And these are 3 of the biggest rivals every year, on the slate for these teams. And you look at Florida, is that common opponent going to be Georgia or is it going to be Tennessee? And and then you look at Tennessee, who is that common opponent going to be? Is it going to be Vanderbilt? Is it going to be Alabama? Is it going to be Florida? So we can go right down the list with so many teams within the SEC. And I guarantee you, if a year or 2 goes by where you're not seeing Alabama take on, an LSU, or you're not seeing a Florida take on a Georgia or a Tennessee, people are going to be very upset. That's the bottom line because rivalries are one thing, but people don't understand in this region how much people look towards these games. You just look at Knoxville last year when it was about the first time in about 15 years when since Tennessee knocked off Alabama, and you tell me that win didn't matter. You think about the intensity of the Alabama LSU rivalry since Nick Saban, who left LSU, coached the Miami Dolphins for a couple of years, and came back to coach Alabama. If that doesn't matter, you think about the intensity in the Iron Bowl between Auburn and Alabama, the intensity when Georgia and Auburn get it on between the hedges, excuse me, the Egg Bowl between Mississippi and Mississippi State. There's a lot of things going on there. And just for the sake of argument, with Texas coming into the fray, okay, are you going to have them play Texas A&M, or are you going to scrap their annual game with Oklahoma and Dallas? These are a lot of questions. So for me, I think the 3-6 format would have alleviated a lot of that. And I just think the SEC just missed a huge opportunity. You're already the premier conference in the league. And why not keep the formula going that got you here as far as your rivalries, these impact games? So at some point you can hear it in the voice of the conference commissioner. He wants it, but he's got to get everybody on board. It's got to happen sooner than later. The SEC has to go to 9 teams. I think the fact that they're still at 8 teams is a joke. Of course, there's reasoning for it, money, and of course, getting an easier slot, if you will, to get to a bowl game. But at the end of the day, if you're good enough, regardless who you play, you'll find a way to win. This is just a cop out. So let's just see at some point if the SEC decides to save face and do an about face and get this done. So, folks, that is going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take the time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you have not already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it will be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. Now, you can check it out. Drop a line and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. So, once again, fine folks, my name is William Martin, and I'm signing off. And I'm saying take care and have yourselves a wonderful day.